The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air Magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link, which says, "See everything we do." Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes from Plein Air and Fine Art Connoisseur magazines. This is a time to take advantage of an opportunity to learn and grow as an artist. If you want to learn landscape painting, we've got a good one for you today. Bill Davidson with Landscape Painting Secrets.
Good morning, I'm Bill Davidson. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to work on a process on how to paint clouds and skies, but it's more importantly going to be about the process, and we're going to come down and bring it into a marsh. Now, one of the things that's always fun to me is that you try to keep it excited and try to keep it moving. One thing I'm going to do throughout the entire process is I'm going to talk an awful lot. I always say this when I'm teaching a workshop, that if I can get people to understand what's going on, or kind of get in your head, I hate to say that, get in my head, people don't generally want to be there, but where you get going with the point of view of understanding what's going on. For me, watching somebody do something is one way of learning, getting them to talk about it is a second way of learning, but when you combine it, studies show, and they're pretty scientific studies show, that all of a sudden your retention of how to deal with things is really a much better scenario. As a matter of background, I'm a recovering trial lawyer, if that helps at all, and so I kind of tend to talk and communicate while I'm painting, and I really want to convey as much as possible the decisions I go through in my process to make it work. I've tried to simplify the process because I've learned that what we all need to do is when you talk to people in workshops, they won't really say, they go, "Oh, I quit painting," or "I won't do this because I really don't know how." So the key here is to really get out enough knowledge for people to go, "Oh, I know how to do that," and to feel some type of sense of accomplishment as you're going through it. Art's a hard thing, and there's a lot of processes out there. I try to keep it really simple. I'm going to try to talk my way through it. And I'm going to use demos of things that I had painted so that I'm not trying something new on you for the first time. Okay, I want you to understand that what I want you to do is just feel your way through, listen, and try to do these type things, and at least try it a few times. If you don't like it, find something that you like to do with it, or just change it a little bit. I had a great guy, a great artist, Ned Mueller, tell me one time, if you did tonal studies, it would really help you. You'd grow a lot faster. And he was basically saying value studies. For me, I know I don't like to pencil draw. I really love oil paints. I really love the way they move. So I just had to shift that to me doing warm tonals before I paint. And I find that if you do that, it really helps your painting process. Everybody's really good with something. In other words, you could be really good at values and shapes, or you could be good at color. But I've never seen anybody in over 100 workshops that really has all three of those naturally. unless you're a very experienced painter, and there's a lot of really great painters out there that can do it without even paying attention to a process. But for me, to break it down simply so that I can do my value studies with my tonal up front with a nice warm tonal, and then work my way into doing the color mixing and then putting the color on, I learn my shapes and my values way quicker, way faster, and almost every time I get a better painting. Every now and then I may get lucky. But I found out that if I stay in that process, and all it is a little ritual, then everything works out better for me. Now sure, sometimes I get overexcited. I go to a scene, it's so beautiful, I can't stand it, I can't calm myself down, so I just get the bad one out of the way, which happens to all of us, and then I'll sit down and start playing with my total, start to lay it in. It's also a great idea, like if you're going into a competition or something, and you have to paint one of those things, if you're painting the tonal, everybody tends to leave you alone, okay? They'll walk by, people won't bother you because they think you don't know what you're doing, and you're pretty much an amateur, so they'll kind of leave you alone, and then you'll be free to kind of paint really well, or at least try to get something really good. So it's always a good thing to do. Now as we go through this, and in a little while, I'll show you just a few of my studies that I've done. And just so you know, when I do the larger paintings, I always do the study also, but I also do it when I'm plein air, okay? And one of the things I found is painting from life can be very difficult, especially for somebody like me who I started painting really actively about 12 years ago, and I struggle with shapes and values, especially shapes. They were really difficult for me. So by doing this and working around my shapes, I kept figuring out simple ways to do things that kind of make it easier. So from this point, I'm just going to take a quick break here, and I'll show you a few of the studies and how I dealt with them. So here are my studies. I'm just going to show you a few of them, and these are done usually plein air. And so this is a little piece that was done up in the Montana region, and the purpose of this piece was to be able to grab the yellow part of the autumn time, because it's such a pretty experience for me, and especially when you've still got the snow on the mountains, and to really work my way into underwater rocks and logs and things of that type nature. So when I'm outside and I'm doing things like this is the hardest part for me, as I say, to get interesting shapes going on in the snow patches, to get interesting rocks, to get angles countering each other, and to get all the big shapes and values. So once again, I probably would have done a tonal, actually I'm sure I did, just to be able to relate these things and try to get all these shapes to be interesting. The key to the painting is always, how interesting can I make the painting? And even though I was not good at shapes, and you have to, that's a process that you learn, you get a better repertoire with it. Even Da Vinci used to say, hey, he'd have his students take what's on the wall, just the stains, and keep doing shapes out of there to get a good repertoire of shapes. So some people are really good at it, and that's a natural thing for them. Or it's a learned thing, it's just a learned trait, but everybody can learn these type things. That's the real thing that I want to try to get across. You can increase your brain power, you can increase your skills, you can do all these things and still have a good time doing it. I can struggle with some of these. I can watch somebody like a Cindy Barron put these in and she nails the shapes right off the bat. So for me, the tonal is hugely important. Now I'll show you like another little piece. I did this one. This is a piece I did. It was I was teaching a workshop. This is beautiful. This is the Garrapatta area, and one of the things I was trying to do was the sun comes over those mountains and it hits in the shade, and then it lights up all down through the water. So catching the light against the shade is really probably the most important part and what I really needed to get out of this. I designed and did a bigger picture, and so I always take these studies in and redesign them and make the shapes bigger, and I can use this to even do a horizontal or whatever. My design won't always be perfect outside because it's such a quick, so I always say this, when you're plein air painting, what's really you're trying to catch, there's the inspiration out there, and you also, in addition to the inspiration, you're really trying to get the colors and the values. If you miss on your design a little bit, so what? It's a study. I mean, I always like to say this, you know, if you go on a trip and you paint 20 paintings and you come back with maybe 5 that are decent, that's awesome. So stay with those and work with those. Don't work on your dogs, okay? I don't know why we all want to fix those, but go with your good ones and it gets a lot more fun. As I keep going here, here's another little mountain piece I painted. This is up in Moran Valley in the Rocky Mountain National Park. This was just painted about a month ago. It doesn't have any varnish on it or anything, so it's still a little rough. There's probably a few touch-ups I could do. It was an interesting day. That really good artist, Michael Lynch, I don't know if y'all know him, but I would look up his work. He was painting that day too. He really got a beautiful piece, and what I really noticed about the way Michael paints is this. And he talks about it, it's getting like a poem, or just the feeling and the experience of that day. How do you get like some type of visual rendering of a poem of what the experience was like? So that becomes one of the things that I just really find important. Then I have, so if I go back, I can go back to Garrapatta again. This is like a 12 by 24. Another shot, and it's because I love this area so much, and when you're teaching a workshop, it's so nice to be out there. So just picking up the light to shade against and the way the atmosphere moves back. So I use these to create bigger pieces. So this could go to like a 24 by 48 or something like that. And just so that you're in the scenario where you're thinking this way, once I have this and I start to build a bigger painting, I can redesign the shapes again. I'll always do my tonal first. That way when I go in, I'm pretty sure my shapes are going to be good and everything's going to be, it's a lot easier to put that color on when I know where I'm going. So as I go, and they come in all sizes. So this is just a smaller piece, a quick piece I did of the Tetons. It was a fall time, and I was really just trying to work on the atmosphere and catching a few things like that. These are really kind of fun to do, but these are valuable, so they're really kind of the type of thing that you can use later on. This was just one I did at the Olmsted Park, had all those painters in there painting a big event in Atlanta. I don't participate in it because I kind of act as a little bit of a help to them. And so what I did here was we went down and there was a few painters down there, and I just did a little painting from down in the woods. It's just a fun little thing to do. Took about an hour and a half, and the really fun part was there was a bunch of artists down there laughing and talking, and just Colin Page was down there, Regular Rock. So it was really a fun type scenario. I'll show you a little bigger painting that I did. This is, and this will be what we're going to get to this now, because this is going to be what we'll be working off of today. So this is a demo I did, and I had it shipped in. I hadn't seen it since I actually did the demo. So I'm going to use this demo, and what I did was, because I was demoing in front of a bunch of people, what I did was I went out the day before and I grabbed a couple of cloud studies just to get the atmosphere and the colors. And I never finished that painting because a storm came in. So when I got ready to use that demo, I had this little piece about probably 11 by 14, and I just used it to get my colors there. So this painting probably is not really totally brought to a finish yet, but I'm going to use it as my study, my color study, because I'm a firm believer in this. You can't paint colors accurately unless you're outside or you have a study to work off of. If you're trying to make up studies, it's very, very difficult to do. Okay, so that takes care of a few of these studies. So now we'll get ready to get on with the process of my process of working my way through how to actually get some type of painting. All right, so what I'm trying to do is, and I hope that this is some help, because this is really my whole goal, is to try to talk enough to be able to explain to you the decision making that I go through. Not that I've been around some really good painters, and I've watched them and listened to them and kind of learned from them and been able to kind of figure out a little bit about how maybe their mind works in a certain decision making process. The great thing about all this painting is you never get there. You run into somebody new, you learn something new, keep it fresh. It becomes really fun. So you go from novelty to nuance. And one of the reasons I chose this type painting is I want to be talking about clouds for this reason, clouds and lighting and the nuances you can find up there, then work my way through the marsh areas because it become really fun to paint and get some of the light reflected down in the water. But it'll be interesting just because the clouds always move. So this is one of the funniest things that happened to me. I was teaching a workshop in Macon, Georgia, great group of people. And they were going, okay, when we're going to have the cloud demo. Beautiful clouds were coming by all day. Everybody got set up behind my car. I got ready to do the demo, looked up in the sky, and there were no clouds left at all. So one of the things that you always have to do is, I firmly believe that making up your shapes, being able to create the shapes, is when you really see an artist start to move to another higher level. So when you're teaching the workshops and you go, the clouds obviously are not going to stand still. So being able to teach people how to make their shapes up in the tonal is one of the greatest learning experiences, because a lot of the things need to be designed, and clouds, running water, things like that are perfect opportunities to step in and design. So when I get into something like this, and what I've done is I'll be working off the color from that other painting, that demo that I did. And what I'm going to do is, I took there's a couple of apps out there. And this is a fun thing to do. This one's called Art Set Pro. And what I did is I took a picture of the painting that I had there, and I went in and I just redesigned all the shapes. And you can do this having coffee in the morning, whenever. But it's not copying anything. What it's doing is training you to redesign and how to play with your shapes. The more interesting you can make the shapes, the better off the painting becomes. And it's your design. You need to make them up. So one of the things that you need to do is, this is a great way to learn how to change an edge on a shape and make a better shape. So usually when I'm almost done with the painting, 80 to 90% through, I may take a picture of it and then actually throw it up in Art Set Pro, and I'll start playing with the shapes to go, what if I move that over here? Does it make it a better painting? It's all about the painting. If I move this over here, if I move this farther out? It's always interesting to me in a workshop, if I'm playing with things like that on a big canvas and people are watching, if I change a shape and I go, is it better or is it not? Everybody will always, almost unanimously agree that that's a better shape and that therefore it made a better painting. So doing these type of things, now look, you can get carried away and you could be in there forever. You could change shapes for the rest of your life. At some point you just got to stop and move on. Perfectionism's a killer. So if you're trying to be perfect, it'll just almost keep you from painting. There was a great study they did one time where they told one group of students to paint everything from just a whole bunch of paintings, and then they told another group to actually paint one piece and make it perfect. The group that painted more paintings and didn't try to get it perfect came up with a better painting. So, but this is kind of how I work my way through it. So what I'm going to do is I'll be using this because I now have my shapes, and I want you to see why I dealt with them. And as long as the shapes are interesting, it'll start to make a good painting. So what we'll do is we'll start to throw up some paint here. I'll show you how to do my tonal, how I do one. And then, it's always fun to try to paint along. So I noticed one time, I used to play golf, that if I watched the pros on Sunday and I went to play golf during the week, all of a sudden I played a little better just because I was watching their type strokes. Now look, we all have our own style. And you can go to a teacher and you learn a few things and you'll look like them for a little while, but everything becomes your own, okay? As long as you're not copying identically, it will become part of you. And so as you go to workshops and you meet people and you continue to learn, every little part you start putting it into your own. But it's very difficult. It's almost like your signature. Your style kind of finds you, and when it does that, it's interesting. I never tried to develop mine, and most really good artists that I've run into, they didn't try to develop it. It just kind of came to them. So I don't get too worried about that. I mean, somebody told me one time, they said, I tried to copy your stroke. They said, I can't do your strokes. You're not supposed to, and you never will. So the great thing about this is you don't have to worry about it. All you have to do is paint. You don't need to be sitting in a room one day for 3 hours going and figuring out my style right now. Whatever you'd love to paint is the first question, and how you'd love it to look. If you can get to that, then everything's going to come to you. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to move this over here, and we'll throw up a canvas and we'll get started. We're going to go ahead and start to lay this out. Now, one of the things that really gets fun here is I'm going to try to keep on talking all my way through this thing so that you understand it. And you may get tired of me talking, but it's one of those things where when I was really trying to learn, I was going, please talk, please talk, please talk. Because I think if you can figure out what's going on or why those decisions are being made the way they're being made, then at some point in time, I mean, with a lot of practice, all of a sudden you get to the point where you can do it, okay? At first, it's not as easy. It's always interesting to me when we're painting a marsh and we're in a workshop and we'll design some type of unique marsh and the water running through it. A lot of times you can see why people struggle with shapes. It'll almost look like a road running down through there. And that's just at first, because like I say, I was probably the worst starting painter that ever started. And so it's all learnable. There's no magic fairy dust that they sprinkle on you that goes, oh. So the great thing about that is it's all within your control, as long as you stay excited about it and keep going. So I'm all excited because I get to paint. And so I'll be here getting to lay this out. Now the first thing probably that everybody wants to do, and people approach this differently. The reason I'm going to do the tonal, once again, is to lay out my shapes, get my values in there. Now look, one of the nicest things about this is I've had people in workshops paint an incredible tonal, just gorgeous. And it looks, you know, it's just like doing a black and white TV except in warm. And they go, I don't want to ruin it with the color, and I'll tell them just to put Galcid light over it or something like that, let it dry, and then they can put the color over it or if they want to, or just start with another painting. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to try to talk about this from the point of view when I'm outside and also inside. So if I come back to here and I go, okay, the first thing I do usually when I'm outside is I'll go in and set my horizon line, which is fairly simple. You just hold out right at your eye level and you'll be able to set your horizon line kind of close to where I'm headed, okay? Always start real thin because one of the biggest problems with color is if you keep painting over and over and over it, it starts to get all grayed out and muddy. And mud is just an inaccurate temperature in the wrong place. Or just grayed, it becomes grayed down from just stroking it and stroking it and stroking it. So one of the reasons and the logic for the tonal is because it allows you to know where you're headed. You're solving problems up front, which is the most important thing. The more problems you solve before you start laying on thick color, the fresher the painting is going to look and the stronger it's going to look. Now also this could happen, because I've done this before in a workshop, is where if you take like a large canvas, a 30 by 40, once I have the tonal in there and I know where I'm getting there, you can lay the paint on there in about 35 minutes at a full 30 by 40 with a nice big brush, and you can really go for it. The nice thing about that is it keeps that big painting looking really fresh, like a plein air study, because the brush strokes are all loose. And that's how you get a really good loose feel, is you know where you're headed with all your shapes and you know where your values are going to be. So let's say I come in here and I start to lay in. I just start to get this horizon line. And then from there, I'll start to do my design. Now I want to show you something here, because what happens is I want to get some reflections. They're not shown here. This is just a quick little thing to give me some idea of my big shapes and how I'm going to put this painting together. So I increased my depth from here to here so that now I will be able to slide in some reflections under here that'll really help the painting bringing the water up. As long as my shapes are interesting and different, it'll really work. Also, from a design perspective, I've got a little touch of light coming over here and over here. My design kind of pulls yourself down and around through the painting and kind of has a nice type feel, and it also pulls you up. I want interest throughout the entire painting. In other words, I don't want a whole area flattened out. So this piece over here to that piece, you'll also notice that I have a piece of light right against the edge here, piece of light there. I'm watching all my spacing. Is this spacing right here bigger than that spacing? Than that spacing. So I'll always try to do things like that. One of the, and listen, it's nice to have little sayings, because when you're plein air painting, you can't think about complicated matters. And from a design point of view, you just have to look at things and go, a lot of times, painting rocks and stuff like that, and painting clouds, it can be very, very complex, and you can get hung up in all the little clouds. I've learned, because I was so bad with shapes, that if I put a big cloud in or a big rock in, a lot of times that'll help save my shape. And that'll help me a lot from that perspective. So if you're getting a problem and you got a bunch of little things, and you know, all this stuff is corny, but it's true. If you know that you're looking at your living room or whatever, and there's no couch in there, it's just a bad design. So sometimes this big shape will come in and help you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this in here, and I'm going to start paying attention to my shapes. If that's close, as long as I'm nice and loose, I can throw in a little bit of color here. Now, I'll talk about my color when I get into that, okay? And all my different type utensils and tools and all that type things. I will mention this, when you use a brush, and I do like the rosemary brushes because these really hold up well. But really great painters, if you're around really painters that have been painting their whole life and they're really good, they'll tell you that they're just tools and you can learn to use the tools. I like the roseberries because I like the way they feel and they step up. And so you start to find the materials you like the best. But really good painters can almost use any tool, and it's the way they get to it. So as we start to lay this out, I'm just going to throw in a few lines. So I can get some idea of where my lay-in is. Now look, some people are line drawers and some people are shape people. They see better in shapes. I like to use you figure out what works for you. I like to use a little bit of both, because all I have to do is try to work my way towards this stuff and make sure I've got my lines and all my negative spaces lined up good too. So I'm just going to throw in a few lines to get some idea of where we're headed here. And then I actually see better with shapes. So probably what I'll do is I'll get this in, and then I'll start working my way into the shapes, and I'll be able to see it a little better. So I can see that I got that line too close to this line, so I'm going to pull this up a little bit. This is a little bit closer down here. This is a big, and I may be a little low, but I can fix that as I go. So I've got some idea of where all this is headed. And if you've ever done that drawing book with drawing on the right side of the brain, you'll know that it's just an idea of you're not talking about clouds or shapes or anything like that. What you're really trying to do is you're throwing your mind out so that you're really not thinking these are clouds, these are just color notes or shapes. I have a tendency to get paint everywhere. All right, so as I start to go here, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to stay in my midtones, okay? So I'm going to stay kind of close in values. One of the things about skies is it's just so light that what you want to do, a lot of people paint them too heavy. So get really careful that you keep your values up nice and light, so what's down here actually becomes heavier and sits on the ground plane. So if I start to throw in some of these things, you don't want to get anything too thick like I just did. So look, it gets very easy to do this, to get these things off. Make the line. All lines should be interesting. So that line was a little bit stayed because I did it. And so all I'm doing now is getting in a couple of more lines so I can see where I'm headed. All right, so if I pull this up, so what I'm doing, these are at the same spot. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling this up a little bit. And what that's going to do is offset so this one moves back a little more. Once again, this line here is going to be a little bit bigger here. I'm watching all my spacing. This line's coming in here, right where that, I'm trying to leave that space there, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in the light from this cloud and reflect it down into the water. Okay, so now it's very easy. People can very easily get lost. So what if I'm out there this may not look anything like this. It may look entirely different. What I'm doing is I'm working my way into a design. I'm going to switch to a bigger brush now. All I'm trying to do is work my way into a design that's going to work. And I'm going to design whatever landscape's out there, unless it's something like, if you're painting something where you want it to look kind of reasonably like the Tetons or something, you just pick the salient factors, okay? Go for the big things, and then don't get too worried about it. Because what happens is, especially on a mountain painting or something, the shape of the rocks are going to change like every 10 minutes. So the shade's going to be missing. And so what's going to happen is, it's just going to change, and all the shapes are going to change like every 10 minutes. So you still have to design everything. And once you start to figure that out, your paintings, like I say, everybody gets really better when that happens. Because all of a sudden you can do that. Now, I'm using, I can wipe out. One of the things that I found is, because I'm not great with the shapes, wiping out the lights, especially on a big rock pile or in the clouds, is really helpful for people that struggle with their shapes. So if you're one of those people like me, where that's a real problem, then being able to wipe them out really changes. Now, as I go back, I'm going to get a little bit lighter. And I'm just using warm colors, okay? Anything to me that's warm right now, because if I've found that warm paintings tend to be a better feel for me. I like them better. They also tend to sell a little better. And so what I'm trying to do is, if anything shows through on this canvas once I get going, I want it to be a little bit of warm. I don't want it to be a cold color, because I'm trying to get close to a landscape that's going to actually be something that I can recognize. Now, as I start to go, I'll just keep playing with all this. Now I'm going to get really light. Because once I go from down here and I go up into my sky area, okay? As long as I keep it nice and loose, I can keep it real thin, I can start to play with these shapes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out these shapes as I start to go. So I'll just get it all on here. And let's say I deal with this big cloud here, okay? I can put it all down, and I've got another one over here. Now, one thing I've learned, because shapes are so difficult for me and so hard, that what I've learned is I don't have to redo, and I think let me explain this. I think the reason for that is this. If I'm in a scenario where I go, oh, the shapes are bad, and I'm changing one shape, it's always affecting the negative shape. So you can't think about two things at one time very easily. So one of the things I've learned is, if I just get on the edge of the shape, once I get a shape in there, if I just get on the edge of it, I can change maybe just a little piece of it, and that'll solve my problem. Okay? Now I'm just going to get a hair darker. So let's grab a little bit, another warmer color. Once again, I'm staying all in warm. The underneath of the cloud. There's a great drawing landscape. It's a book, all these books are on my website, but it talks about drawing the landscape, and the guy does a really good job of laying out designs. I can't remember the name of the book, but I can tell you this, if it's one of those things where it's on my website and it's easy to find, it's a drawing book, and it's about drawing the landscape. So it's very nice to read things like that, because the guy did an incredible job of talking about how to design a real estate. And you know, of course, you can add that to all the Carlson books and the Edgar Payne. Edgar Payne's a little obtuse in his writing, because I don't like it when people use big words to describe the painting process, because it's very difficult to remember. And like that coach from Seattle Seahawks, he's like, keep it simple And that's one of the things that we used to do as trial lawyers. How do you get it to like a 6th grade level so people can understand it? Now look, that's not saying all us artists are at the 6th grade level, but why make it complicated when you can actually make it? And I always say this sometimes when I'm actually teaching a workshop, I'll say, I'd rather you be able to understand what's going on than for you to be in a scenario where I have to paint a great painting and you have to sit there and watch me and you have no idea how I got there. That's presuming I can paint a great painting. One day I'll get one of those done. I'll be really happy. But here's the fun part. I'm painting today, so I'm not going to worry about it. And look, that's part of the process. Don't ever get any judgment about yourself. Oh, I'm just no good. When you start to get there, remember, it's all about, I can do this. All I need is good education. I need inspiration. I need friends, those type things, and I'm ready to go. Okay, so I've kind of got an idea. I'm getting there. All I'm doing is feeling my way through this. Look, I do this in every painting, plein air, whatever. And it's because, here's the funny thing, if I raise even my horizon line, sometimes it just totally affects the painting for the benefit of the painting. Now the blue sky, a lot of times, and look, these are just guidelines, okay? When you're out there, and you can paint the exceptions. People go, oh, well, that's not always like that. So they go, it doesn't make any difference. You're not looking for the exceptions at first. The more you can get the nuance, the better you get. But at first, you need to get what's really going on, okay? So what I'm going to do is, the blue, a lot of times, in the sky, will be close in value to some of these midtones in the clouds. So it's a temperature shift. Now, I had an interesting conversation the other day with Michael, and it's funny, with Michael Lynch, that about, everything needs its own shape. So the funny thing is, when you're teaching a workshop and you walk up to people and you go, you can tell right where they got lost. It's almost so easy to do that you can just walk up and go, okay, this is where you struggle. And they'll go, how do you know? And you'll go, well, you can see it in the brush stroke. You can see that the shapes are all fuzzy. All kinds of things start going on there. Now, all I'm doing is covering in the blue. And look, I'm training my head to be thinking about these problems before I get into really putting all the color on. So now I'm just starting to lay back in some of the blue areas, and I'm going to use the rag to pull out my lights. How I get this on, and this is funny because I like to say this, get all your licking out of the way now. Because at some point when you get ready to put on the color, you can't be up here and just keep going like that forever. So I'm just getting some of this out of the way. Now I'm starting to get some idea where I'm headed. And you can use a rag, whatever you need to do, just to get this stuff on here in a fun way. Don't get to this angle. Always think about this. As I'm designing, all my angles are really important. My stronger angles are always up here in the sky and down here. As I get closer to the horizon line, everything levels out. So it's easy to go stronger angles top, stronger angles near the foreground, and start to level out. Once again, it's just a general guideline, but it's a nice guideline so that you can start to get perspective on what's going on from a design point of view, and then you can get into your color perspective later on. And so what I'm trying to do in this demo is I'm trying to teach you how to kind of stay with a program where you can figure out the general basics and then work your way back in. Everything's an exception. So like if I put the light back here and a little darker in the foreground in the water, what it'll do is it'll sit this water down up front and then start to move back what's going on back there. Now you can reverse that. You can reverse that and get your light up front here. but it's a little more difficult to do. And you can do that. And look, there's a great guy that painted water, a dead guy, a guy named Fritz Thalo. Now, I'm going to go a little darker up here and just start to throw in this shape. The nice thing about this is you don't have to be dead on accurate. You can start to get this in, and then sometimes you will get a happy accident. I guess that's a Bob Ross statement. You'll get a happy accident from something like a shape that turns out even better here. And so your key is to recognize, is that a better shape? So when you talk about shapes, the key once again becomes, how interesting is it? Now, one of the things that I've always learned is that if you're one of those people that can do this very easily, and there's not many that have that natural talent with shapes. So if you watch workshops, you'll start to see that's probably one of the strongest struggles people have. I know people talk about value all the time. But value is something where if you nail it, it just creates your light effect really strong. And we'll talk about that as we work our way into the color. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is the design here. There was a great guy named James Reynolds. He died and he wrote an incredible book. What he did was, he was kind of brave, he took all his paintings that he'd done, or a bunch of them, and he wrote this book and critiqued them all. And I thought, boy, that was interesting. So when I read it, it just goes to show you, nobody paints a perfect painting, and right before you die, you're going to look at your paintings and go, wow, I could have done that in that painting, and I could have done that in that painting, it would be a better painting. So it's just one of those things where they're never going to be perfect, but the better you get at it, the better you're going to be. Now, one thing that I did when I was designing these clouds, and it doesn't have to be dead on perfect, but the more you can connect your dark shapes, the stronger the painting can hold together. So I've got all these clouds kind of running together and a few isolated ones over here, okay? And what's going to happen there is it kind of creates the mass and kind of holds it together a little better. Harley Brown did a great thing in his book where he showed he was painting like a little street scene, and he showed how he connected those darks, and it became a much better scene by doing that. So just by holding all these clouds over here together, this little rainstorm brings me down into my dark. So it kind of connects all that. So from that perspective, what's that doing is, and look, I'll get more detailed when I get into the painting and slow way down. But by connecting the darks, you have a tendency to create a more solid mass. And if it's going to be interesting, make sure that you have unequal parts of shade and light. And I'll show you a little bit of something once I get going here I'll flip these upside down once I go so I can see. Now, one thing that I want is really kind of interesting. Because this isn't really accurate, I know that's too dark compared to that. My darkest part of mine, and this is just another general rule again. Every now and then you'll see a cloud that's darker than what's back here. But right here, if I stay this, if I know that set of trees, if I keep it darker than what's right above it in those clouds, what it's going to do is it's going to set this down and let those clouds float. If I get that too light and I get these darker up here, those trees are going to get, the clouds are going to start sinking down on my painting. And once again, the reason I chose this is because clouds, painting a new landscape is hard. You go somewhere you've never been, but if you can paint a good set of clouds or a good sky, all of a sudden you get a great look at, you can go anywhere, and if you decide I'm tired of trying to learn that, it's really hard right now, you want to take a break, go ahead and paint another set of skies. Plus they're so interesting. The more you paint them, the better it gets from your perspective. So I'm watching this line again to make sure it's bigger than that line. All right, so things are starting to get a little better. Now, I'm going to start pulling out these lights in a little bit. I'm going to be a little darker in this foreground. And I like to talk about transitions a lot. As the water moves back, a lot of times, if I look straight down, I can see straight down into the water. And then as I start to move, as I start to look up, I just can't see into the water as much. So that's generally why it's darker as you start to move back, except when the light reflects down in it, okay? So I'll keep going here, and I'm just taking my time getting this on. And look, it's part of the program. I'm not going to rush to get, if this design isn't right, or let's say I don't like it, then I'll just redo it. I'll flip, let's say I want to change it to a vertical. One time I was out there and like 3 times, I painted it 3 times this way and I went, I don't like it, and I just turned around and painted a vertical of it, and I like the vertical. Now, you people that like to draw and can do those little sketches, more power to you. I think those are great. I just don't like to draw. So I had to figure out a way to where this worked for me. So as it starts to come in, now I'm going to just keep playing with it. And now I'll just smooth it out a little bit and cover everything up. I don't really like the white showing through. Now I use these shop towels, and I know they're more expensive, but the more you wipe, the old Vivas started getting lint on them. They changed their style. Somebody said the new ones aren't as bad anymore, but I don't know the answer to that. So as I start to go now, I've learned that if I watch people while they're painting, especially in the workshop, one of the things that you'll see is that they're much better at pulling the lights out than they are painting them on. So I can come back into here. I'm going to start to pull these shapes out. These are going to be the light areas of my cloud. Once again, watch the shape. It gets real easy to see these shapes at this point. So if the line comes down this way, I may counter just a little piece out that way. Always keep looking for how to counter your lines. I had a funny shape up there, so I just changed the shape now. It started to look like a little bit of a rectangle. Now I'll start to pull the cloud over this way, go up like that, come down in here. I'm going to have a focal point like right in here. At least another area of interest. And you always think about what's your strongest area of interest. I can pop that, or I can pop these little touches. When I start to put, if you start to put birds, people, or animals in there, a lot of times they're going to pick up the primary interest. Now, I'm just starting now. I'm going to start adding in some of the light in that cloud. And it's interesting to me that in this landscape book, the guy always talked about, he goes, it's much easier to think in terms of 3s when you're doing anything. So a cloud may have 3 shapes. Now this is an oversimplification, but if you start to get 3 shapes in, like in other words, a dark, a medium, and a light, and you think in values like that all the time, what happens is you start to get form and you don't overcomplicate it. Overcomplication at this stage is not helpful to you. So my touch of light, I can pull my light out right through here. Okay? So I'm starting to see how this is all going to come together. I got another touch of light that's running out to here. Shape, a little more dark, it sits up in here. It's always interesting if you watch like really good painters, at this stage, a lot of them look like you go, what are they doing? And then you start to realize they're in their mind, they're just working their way through all the problems that are going on in the painting. How do they get a better shape? How do I do this? How do I do that? These type things really start to help. Now see, if I had started all this with color, I would have had to have been real careful. And look, really good painters can do that. Although I still think, at least for me at my stage where I am, is I still get better paintings. Even if I think I can do it without the tonal, I still get better ones if I do it with the tonal. Just works out better for me. That's a little low, and I want a little more angle to it at this stage. Now, one of the things that's starting to work is I've got a perspective thing going on here. I've got bigger clouds and stronger angles up top. As I get closer to the horizon, everything's going to start to get smaller. Okay? So, once again, if I talk about the thirds, the dark part of this cloud is going to swing around right through here. That's a little dark. My line has to be interesting again. And this line is connecting a little bit here, a little bit up in there, those type things, okay? I don't have to be dead on perfect here, but I still want to be able to get something in here that is going to be close enough, or once I start to get the color on, I've resolved a lot of issues in my head, and I worked my way through this. So it's starting to take a little better form. I can see this line here, needs a little bit of a rise. And as I'm doing this, I can also start to go, okay, what if I change that when this one starts to look better that way? So it's at this stage, what you're doing is you're training yourself to start recognizing what's a good shape, what's a bad shape, and what is a good value. And if you're doing this in color, people have a hard enough time seeing color for what the value it is. In other words, yellow always looks lighter than it usually looks. And blue, like ultramarine blue, is always going to look darker than it really is. So by just staying in these neutral warm tones, you start to really see what value really looks like and how it really affects a painting, and what shapes really look like and how they really affect the painting. I'm spending a little extra time on this so you can see it's still real thin, but it's just one of these things. I may drop that line down so it's not so straight. Okay, so as the more I play with this, the easier it gets to see. And when I get ready to go into the color, the nice thing about this is I will have already worked out most of these issues. This is a little steeper line. This one's going back up that way, more that way. Should be a little bit darker here, just a little bit. Different line shape. This one's lower than that one. And then a little bit, come back up that way. They just start to come together a little bit better. Now I'm going to get back down here. Bring your painting together all at once. It's easier to see it that way. Let's get this marsh in a little bit darker so I can start to see this as it's really going to come together. I'll pull the light out down here again too. So for people that go, oh wow, I couldn't really see, now it starts to come together a little better. I can even go a little bit darker here, or move it up a little bit. Just by moving it up a ½ inch, I'll create a ton more depth. So if I move that one, I can take this one even back more. It's these type little adjustments that make all the difference in the world, create all the depth, and really help the paintings. It's interesting to me when you're watching, like, so if this line goes a little darker, and then these are my trees, if that gets a little bit darker, then I know this. I know my ground plane is a little bit lighter than my verticals. So this is just going to be, all I have to do is start pulling out the grassy area and leave those trees back there a little more straight up. And I'm trying to keep this very simplified so that it doesn't turn into something where, if you look, people get too complicated too fast. I'll see a really simplified painting that's just absolutely gorgeous. And then I'll turn around and go, look at that complicated. One of the great examples of that is the Booth Museum in Cartersville, Georgia. Is a big Western museum. It's actually incredible. And Howard Turpning's one of the, they've got several works of Howard Turpning. And if you go in there, and I've taken workshops in there before where I take the class in and they let me take a pointer. You can stand in the middle of a room of that museum and point out and turn around and look at, there'll be like several paintings in there, and all of a sudden you'll see this one painting of a Howard Turkney. His value masses and simplified shapes hold together so much better that you can read it across the room. So there's the impact. That's the entire impact of the whole painting. When you start to see stuff like that, you go, wow, that's what everybody's talking about. The values hold the painting together, and if it gets too complicated in the value shapes, the painting's going to be it's not going to hold together from a distance. And what you want is when somebody walks into a museum or a show, you want them to see your painting from across the room and go, wow. And then when they come up to it, to see all the interest that's going on. So that holding the values together is really what's keeping the paintings nice. And that's why this becomes so important to somebody like me who has such a hard time with shapes. Okay, so it's starting to come together. And I'll keep playing with this just a little bit more. Now what I do is, I think people always keep working too hard. So I'm one of those persons that once I get this on here, I'll take 5 minutes, I'll come back and reevaluate all my shapes before I get started with mixing the color. Now I'm gonna start to clean up a few of these lines just so I get a little more idea where I'm headed. These little nuances become really important at this point because I'm just going to make sure, once I get started with the color, once this stuff is all on here so nicely, it gets really easy to fly through the painting and make it look like, boy, it's so much fun, there's so much interest, and not to overwork the colored strokes once you get them going. It's so easy to work everything if you don't know where you're headed. So people always go, how do you get such loose brush strokes? You get loose brush strokes by knowing where you're headed. So you feel confident enough to know that your shapes are okay, your values are okay, and therefore that your painting's probably going to work. If you go on here and you start putting color on here and you have no idea where you are on your shapes and where you are on your values, what's going to happen is you're going to be in a scenario where you're just not going to feel confident enough about it unless you are, like I say, highly advanced or a really good painter, or you know where you're headed. So that's just one of those things that for me, I don't know if I'll ever be there. So I'm so happy to be able to have something like this to help me get all this stuff squared away before I get in here. Now look, does it work? I think it works. And so did I test it? Yeah. I started entering national competitions to see what I could do. How did I compare on a national level? I don't enter very many of them anymore, but from that point of view, once you realize you're getting in stuff and things are working, you start to go, it does work. Things are working. Things are starting to work. And you start to realize these things are important. Now, if you're one of the people that's good at color, and this is embarrassing for me to say, but I got to say it anyway. I had a gallery owners tell me, oh yeah, shapes are the most important thing. And I had great artists tell me, oh yeah, shapes are hugely important. But because I wasn't good at them, I didn't want to believe them. So this is what you do in your mind. You convince yourself somehow they're not as important as what the rest of the world thinks. But they are. They're hugely important. They're those things that really make the painting, it's all about the design and painting coming together. So, and I know I'm talking about them a lot, but it's important because it's so one of those things that if the design isn't right and this part isn't right, that you're actually in trouble. So see, if this line's too flat, I can change this. Now you're probably going, well, he's just redesigning everything. Well, how do you know? These clouds are never going to stay there. And look, it's all about the painting. It's my mind. Some guy walked up to one of the painters. This guy told me a great story. This guy walked up to him and said, "Hey, that doesn't look anything like what's out there. Or, that doesn't resemble what's going on." He goes, "How do you know what's going on in my mind?" I thought that was a great line. And look, nobody's going to know exactly what you were looking at once you get this thing going, okay? So if it's some type of, like I say, if it's the Tetons or something, or there's some salient factor, just all you have to do is get a few of those mountaintops on there and it's going to work. So look, I'm kind of playing with it right now because I'm starting to have a little bit of fun with it. To go, what if I get that up into there? What if I change that? What if I change that line? What if I play with that line? This shape here, see how it's so bad? It's almost like a rectangle right through here, okay? So this is a line that's too straight for one. What happens here is, this cuts in here, and this cuts in here. And so this cloud shape, the white, the lit up part also has a little better feel to it. So it's a better shape. It's just a better piece. If I get it down like that, it comes in better if it comes in here a little bit, okay? This piece comes in. Now, the interesting thing is, see, if I take this piece of light back into here, I'll try not to stop it where I'm stopping this piece of light. So, and people go, "Oh, this is kind of you're over fussy with what's going on." This is what's important. This is what starts to make it work. So, I'll come back in here. This shape here is weird. This black line, it's still one of those things that doesn't look quite right. So this cuts in a little bit. This cuts down a little bit. And then this cuts up in here a little bit. And it's this line and this line are at the same, whereas up here, really, this line cuts in this way a little more. So it changed up here so that it wasn't all lined up vertically quite like that. Now, as we start to go, this is not a dark up here, so that'll help that. Try not to get your darks and your lights too high up, because when you put frames on it, and it's interesting to me, when you're judging a national competition as for what gets in or not, there was a lot of good paintings I saw when, that you may see, and somebody will all of a sudden have a big bright white light cloud right up here, and it hits, and it just draws your eye up there and you get stuck up there. You're trying to get down into the painting. Also, while I'm thinking about it, everything you want to be directing into the painting, okay? Now, you'll see this all the time, directing out. If you soften your values, there's tricks and things that you can do to take care of that. But if you soften your values, that'll take care of it, things like that. But at first, pay attention to keeping all your lines going back into the painting. People even talk about them, really good painters, like hooks that swing you in. Anything that swings you in that helps you with your painting. So there's no light here. So it's starting to make some sense now. And it's starting to get to the point where it's really fun. Now, at this point, I'm so close. What I'll do is I'll step away from it, and then I'll come right back in, and then I'll put the final touches on this, and we'll start mixing color and talking about color mixing and how to go from there. Okay, so what we're doing now, we're just gonna, I kind of like to I took a quick break, and I want to get some fresh eyes on this, so that even if I have to walk away for 3 to 5 minutes and go bother somebody I'm painting with and really trying to bother them about how their painting's not going to come out and they've got a bad design, I'll come back over with some fresh eyes. It's really fun to kind of play with your friends and just mess with them a little bit. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at these two lines. I'm going, okay, make sure this one gets a little farther out, okay? I could maybe move this over a little bit. Now, as you noticed, I've gotten rid of my design, and if I'm plein air painting, I won't have my iPad or anything like that to work from. So I'm going to move this over just a hair, just to kind of slide me over a little bit closer, okay? Because everybody knows the things about focal point here, 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 and how you lead your way into the painting. Most Americans read left to right, so what they want to do is move in. One of the probably best focal points sits right up in here, but you'll get bored doing it and you want to change things up, and so you'll move them to here or here or here. Even if you can center them, and you can do all kinds of things there to force that to look good. And look, sometimes when I see them centered, it's incredible. But I also may take a painting where it's centered, and if I move that focal point around, if I pull up it still looks better in one of these offset areas. Like I said earlier, all my trees at first looked like the Supreme Court building, so they had no interest to them. The more interest you get in the painting, the more variety, unless it starts to get too confusing, you can overdo it. But my experience is most people just don't get enough. Unless they're playing down in these reeds or something like that, it tends to get way complicated. So now let's just start to put in a little more, just a little more interest, so I can start to see. So if I get this in, what if I slide that out? Now I get to play a little bit. I get to go, now I'm leaving a little bit of room for reflection up in here. Now, remember, if we talk about this, in the landscape, the light source usually almost always comes from the sky. So if you're thinking about the Carlson book and those type things, it's just real easy to remember. Trees are vertical, so this would be almost simulated tree, okay? So they're darkest part of the landscape. The light source is the lightest. This may be the second, next, okay? And as things tilt a little bit, it becomes the rocks and the mountains and things of that. Now that's an oversimplification, but it's good to keep, because people will get up in here, they won't get these reeds dark enough where this area is, and then what they'll do is, so if you start keeping that in mind, and they won't get those back trees, and a lot of times they'll get sometimes the marsh right here on the ground, they'll get it a little bit too dark. So remembering these type things, whenever you start to get in trouble, see, I always go this. If I get in trouble and something's not working on my painting, so see I got that a little too light, what I'll do is I'll think back to myself, what would I say if I walked up to somebody in a workshop, and I can pull myself out a lot of times from a problem that I may have that's fairly simple, I'm just missing it, okay? Now we're talking about representational art here, but we're also talking about abstract design. One of the greatest things about this is every good piece of representational art has a real strong abstract design underneath it, okay? So I may have a little bit of these reeds coming up front here, okay? And all I have to do is get on the edge out here and go, well, what if I don't like that shape? Now I'm not going to put a real strong dark right here at the bottom. I may have some up here, and I can play with color to make this bigger, some reception, some recession going on, and if I pull back here, I won't have all my reeds going, and I'm going to talk about that, how to paint a real strong foreground once we get going. So let's say I get a little lighter right up in here, and I could right underneath those reeds where there's a little more shade, and I may vary this line just a little bit more. I may get a little bit darker down here, especially towards these areas. And then I'll let my light start to come right down in through here. This needs to go a little darker. And the nice thing about light is, it starts to, I can just smooth this out a little bit more. When it comes down, it's going to come down, and then it's going to disseminate out just a little bit more, okay? Light disseminates nicely. So if I'm picking up some of this cloud stuff from up here that's going to be all lit up, I'll just start to play with this. I may even go, if I need to pull off a little more, I'll get a little lighter. Because what I'm trying to do now is just get a feel for how this is really going to look once I start to get up in the painting. I had a touch of light. I've got nothing over here, so I'm going to put in a little bit of water, like right at this base, to bring you back over into here. Watch my shape again. I'll go back and play with the reeds. just a little bit more, but just make sure I get an interesting shape. I can pull that off over there. Okay, so now if I look up into my sky a little bit, everything seems to be kind of okay. I'm okay with everything. This is a little bit lighter here. Once again, the light disseminates. So right next to the light, it's going to be a little bit lighter. And then it's going to darken a little bit as it pulls towards that area of the cloud. Okay, so this section here could get a little bit darker. So I'm always watching these type things. How does my light, especially when you're out there, if this light is real strong coming right to left, it's going to be a little lighter in this cloud right through here, and then a little darker as it starts to get a little farther away. Because this line is coming down this way, I'm going to put a touch of light up in here, once again to get you some interest up here. So I countered this line coming this way with that type line. So always be paying attention to your angles, how are they working, how can I counter, those type things. Now I haven't got in here yet, and I'm going to start playing down in here. I can get a lot of recession going by making these clouds real small and getting real soft edges right down in here. So just by adding that, then once again, I've got to be careful of my shape. So I'll get down in here. I can't get as dark. This is tree line. Now watch, if I just separate this just a little bit, the ground plane will lay down flat, and that tree plane will stand back up back there. You always see this in these marshes. It's really kind of fun to paint down in those things. It's really just a great little thing to do, because you can start to see that. But see how I just separated those values? And so I come back in and I darken this value a little more. Now what happens is, once you've learned to do stuff like this, what you'll do is you'll start going, okay, I know where I am, I can get started now. So the old pull out the light again, let's darken this just a little bit. Even if I do it with just, get some paint on there, do it with a paper towel. And I know this looks a lot, you know, what I'm doing is I'm just making things happen. I'm a little light in some of this stuff, okay? So I've got a few more darker lines. I can get a little bit darker just right up above this, and then a couple little darker lines, make them interesting, and then I'll start burying some nice interesting clouds. I'm going to keep this little rainstorm there. It adds a touch of interest, and it gives me a backdrop here where if I want to throw those birds in, I can go right off into that. So if I get a couple of, this is an interesting thing to always pay attention to. People go like, they do it in trees, they do it in backgrounds, and they do it in all kinds of things. So if they go, well, how do you paint like a big mess of trees that are all together and those type things? You still have to design them. So if I come in here, the easiest way to explain it is this. This angle could have gone up a little higher because this one's going to drop. So I'm going to raise this up just a little bit higher. And I had a touch of light that went in here too, to reflect down in here. So what happens here is if I went like this, and I went, to keep it simple, it'll really help you. If I went, okay, let's get a cloud, and I ran it across, and I've got this light here, and I've got this long piece of light there, I may put a long, I'm just going to pull it out real clear here, piece right there of light. Then I may go a shorter piece, or let's go with a medium piece. And then maybe a real touch of light right there. So by looking at it that simply, now what I've done is I've created a problem here with the spacing between the two. So I may make that one a little bigger. Now, people go, well, aren't you really kind of overthinking this? Not really. So now what I'm going to do is play with my line. But if you keep it simple like this, you go, and people go, oh, this can't be that important. It is. Take it from me, the one who tried to say, call color was the most important thing and shapes weren't, that this type stuff becomes really important. The more interesting the design. So this looks so much better than if I just drawn one line across there and just kept it all one line. Now look, varying the heights, playing on the edges will vary those shapes. So if I want to go like this, let's say this one kind of close to there. Let's say I just wanted to take this one up a little bit more. So get this one just a little bigger, say here, right through there. Okay, so now I've got a fairly decent set, other than the fact that that spacing, this is different over here. I've got a cloud up in here. So I may put a touch of light right against this edge, just down here, just a little cloud on this side, okay? I hate to put them here, hit this rainstorm, and then stop. So all these type of things, this is what I was talking about. Is it logical? Yeah. There's a lot more logic involved in this stage, and this, to me, for people like me, this is the hardest part of the painting. But once I get going, then the color gets easier for me, and I feel kind of good about my design. This is more light up there, so this just stays nice and soft in here. Little light on that edge. So I'm close enough now where I feel like I'm ready to get started. Now, if it's a big painting, I may check myself. I may take a picture of this. I may load it up on my Art Set Pro or do anything, or look at it in the mirror, anything I need to do to go, how am I going to change this a little more? Okay? The funny thing is, people go, well, you know, you can, I went to a museum show, really famous national artist, and right in the middle of his, of a big mountain scene was this huge face. And it was so obvious, it was, you know, you went, ah. So get your friends to look at these things. Get people to check them, okay? I probably got, every time I do a demo like this and I'm in a workshop or something, I'm doing clouds, what happens is I've got a flat, you know, for some reason all of us saw, you know, you did that game when you were a kid, so all of a sudden you have all these animals running through your, and I may have one here or there, okay? But I'm close enough now to where I can start my painting. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start to mix up color. I'm going to talk about my colors and go from there. Okay, I'm just simplifying it a little bit. Now, if I'm outside, if I've done this and I'm painting a big painting, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to go to lunch and let some of this dry up. But if I'm outside, I know I'm going to do this. I'm going to start to wipe it off just a little bit, just to make sure it's real thin. Real simplified, real thin. I don't have any excess paint on here. If you're outside, it'll start to dry real quick. And then if I'm doing a great big one, like a 30 by 40 or something, I'll go to lunch, come back, and then I'll start mixing my paints. Now, one of the things people go, I don't like to mix my paints. That's a hard one, but it allows your tonal to set up a little bit, makes it real easy. Okay, so I think I'm in close enough scenario to where I can actually get started. Now look, they have these little nubbers and stuff like that where you can go in, you can pick out. If I wanted to put the birds in and I didn't feel confident that I could do them with a good design, these little, they're sculpting tools used by, you can actually, I don't have one with me, but you can pull out where these little birds are going to go in that type of scenario. And look, I'm just doing this, you know, people go, well, that could be a little bit, you know, is that a little bit cheesy? Probably not. They're out there, okay? And the better you get at painting, the more you can play with all these things, the more you can change up things. You don't have to do the same type scenes. But for right now, especially when you're learning, if you can paint one decent set of clouds and get some nice reflections and some light going down in the water, it's a great feeling to feel that type of accomplishment. Because if you really look around and you start looking for really great clouds, there's some out there, but there's not as many as you think. And I think one of the reasons is people shy away from them. And I'll go back to this. It's very easy to paint them where you just let all the clouds go amorphous. And you just throw some light in there and you can't tell what the shapes are. but learn how to paint them where you can roll them over and you've created your shapes. It's great for you to learn your shapes. So it's just one of those things where I think we'll get the color out now, we'll start playing with it and work from there.
Landscape painting has the power to inspire our deepest connection with nature, to soothe the mind, and to carry the viewer away to a place that is both sublime and timeless. As a landscape painter, you have the power to help someone feel the heat of the sun reflecting off of billowing clouds and the cool and crisp air of an autumn morning in the Rocky Mountains. Even something so simple as the swaying of reeds alongside a shoreline can hypnotize your viewer. In the all-new Landscape Painting Secrets, Bill Davidson shares a step-by-step and in-depth demonstration that reveals how to capture the raw and essential beauty of nature through oil painting.
Horizon a little warmer, a little cooler in here, a little warmer up here. So it would transition all the way down, and you just keep doing this. Cool, warm, cool, warm, cool, warm. Darker, farther away from the sun, darker a little higher up, more muted as you go farther back. You could paint this whole sky, even without any clouds in it. But learning the clouds, once you get clouds down, it gets really nice to be able to go out and go, I know I'm not afraid to go out there, and this thing will start to work.
You'll discover how to train your eye to perceive the best shapes and values for your painting, how to use focal points to create strong areas of interest and guide the viewer's eye.
I may spot a really good tree and move it over and use it somewhere else. So that's why taking photos also, it's limiting. Okay, it's very limiting. And also when you're dealing with these value finders, you're great to see the values and put them in order, but be careful because you're going to have to make the values fit to make the big shapes work. So you got to be careful with all the tools. Other than that, you'll end up just copying, and that's not going to work out for you the best way you want.
Bill will teach you the secrets to painting foregrounds and backgrounds, how to capture the subtle nuances of reflections on water, and the most effective techniques for working with midtones and temperature shifts. You'll also discover how to make little adjustments that can transform a good painting into an amazing one.
This transition here is a little bit too strong, so all I have to do is get between whatever that value is. There's a transitional value that'll soften this edge and roll this cloud a little bit more.
If you've always wanted to learn how to paint vivid landscape scenes the way the masters do it, then this training video collection was made for you. Landscape Painting Secrets with Bill Davidson is now available on DVD and streaming video.
Well, that was Landscape Painting Secrets with Bill Davidson. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. Now let's get right to the interview. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, and today we're interviewing Bill Davidson. Bill, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you're like this overnight success. You've just appeared on the scene suddenly, and you're taking over the plein air world by storm, the landscape world. I'm sure it's not quite like that, not quite that easy, but how'd that happen?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm probably not taking it over by far. You know, I think probably what happens is I'm willing to put in the effort, okay? So that's kind of how it all comes about. I think I really, I feel like I had a lot of really good people that helped me get, and I feel like I'm standing on a bunch of people's shoulders, and I think I got a long way to go. There's some really good painters out there. So I feel like I'm still way down at the heap and trying to work my way up, but it was really started by really good people, I think. And part of the thing is this, I think it's a matter of curiosity. So for me, I was very excited about painting, and I think you have to learn to lose your judgment. So what happened was I was probably the very worst painter that ever started painting, ever, period.
I think that was actually me.
You know, I'm willing to do battle on that one. And I think it seems like people have a romance with the idea that there's some type of magic put on you and all of a sudden you're a great artist, whereas it's clearly all effort. And I was reading the other day a book called Grit, which is really an interesting book, and I like the term perseverance better than grit. But it was interesting how they said a lot of times the people that are the worst in the beginning actually learn it really well because they're really not flying through the beginning parts. But I mean, it's all goes back to that Michael Jordan thing. Those people that put, you know, they say, you know, everybody says, what a great, he did thousands of basketball shots. So it's, I had really good people too. I had a guy named Damon Carter. He was an illustrator, and I worked with him a lot. And then I worked with, I went to like 20 workshops in 3 years. I wanted to fast track it, so I wanted to learn as much as I could, as fast as I could. And I think that's part of it. I mean, going to really good people and learning things is a lot faster than sitting in your studio doing bad habits and repeating it over and over again, I think.
Well, and you're selling a lot of work right now.
It's working out pretty good.
Yeah.
You know.
So there's something that people don't know about you, probably, and that is that you were a trial lawyer.
Yeah, that's correct. I always call it a recovering trial lawyer because at first I wouldn't even tell people I was a lawyer. But because, you know, people automatically you're disliked. You know, an artist is pretty well, as a general rule, liked. Most lawyers are pretty much hated or despised most of the time.
So do you have a self-esteem problem?
Probably now, yeah. I think anytime you're an artist and you face a new painting, you know, I think you always realize I'm never going to get there, and so it's a struggle to always get there.
So you spent a lot of years doing that, and how did you end up from something so much the opposite of being a trial lawyer to being an artist? How did that all come about?
I think what happened was I hit a period where I went, you know, at first doing certain types of the law was exciting and everything, and then it becomes more of a business and a lot about money. And I thought, you know, I need a lot more meaning in my life. I've got to figure out a way to get it. And so I went to, it was funny. People go, oh, you must have taken art when you were a child. I never did. I did athletics and stuff like that most guys do, and you grow up and you're told earn a living. And you kind of know certain things, though. I was interested in different things, like interested in French, but I was made to take Spanish. I've been to France 6 times teaching workshops. I've never been to Spain. It's kind of funny how you kind of know. But I just went to a little art thing, and I got into it. Once I started going to workshops, I was totally into it.
And who was the first workshop you took?
A guy named Ovanis Barbarian, because
he's so good.
He had incredible brush strokes, and it was really just because of the strokes. I like nice, thick, textured, strokey work, and you know, and I really didn't know who to take from at that point in time. So I just started going, and it turned out to be just a great benefit. And then I happened to meet this illustrator guy, and I think people need that. You really need supportive people, and I've had them around you helping you get better.
So did you just one day say, you know, I'm hanging up my trial lawyer suit and going to go put on my artist suit, or did you transition into this?
I think I transitioned, and you know, one of the things was, you know, you could read that book by Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, and he can talk about you find your passion. Once you do it, invisible hands come up. Well, it kind of happened that way. If I look back on it, I read in certain books it says just jump and go do it. Well, in retrospect, if I had done that, I don't think it would have worked. For the reason I would have been in the studio going, not knowing how to paint before. I think it's a transition thing people really need to go through.
So what's your advice to somebody who's in a role that they kind of want to get out of? They've done it. They may have loved it at one time, but now they want to move on to becoming a successful full-time artist. What do you tell them?
You know, I get that question a lot in the workshops, and I think for me it's pretty simple. you have to, if you've got the interest, you've got to all of a sudden set up a situation where you can get educated. I think the #1 problem for people is, if you teach at a lot of workshops, you find out that they don't paint or they quit painting for some reason. And it's usually because they don't know the next step. So they're stuck and they can't get to the next step, or they don't understand it. It's not simplified enough. And I think if you look at it from a big perspective, you'll see that people go, oh, I just want to be an artist. And everything takes steps, small, tiny steps. And if you do it over a long period of time, you eventually get there. And I think that, if I can break it down and go tomorrow, I'll work for 4 hours on learning the nuances of clouds. And I do things like that, even if it's not 4 hours, but if it's small enough to bite off, I think it really helps.
Well, that's called chunk learning, right? So I don't know if you were there, but we had a session about that with Brian and Mark Taylor at the Plein Air Convention. The concept is that you pick one small thing. Let's say you're learning to play piano. Rather than trying to learn the whole song, you learn the first 3 notes, and you do the first 3 notes over and over and over again in perfect practice. And you start out slow, and then you get faster and faster till you're at the right tempo. And then you learn the next 3 notes, and that cements in your head. And that's what chunk learning is like. And so we actually just released a DVD on chunk learning for artists, giving them a system so they can follow that and practice little pieces at a time. So you were doing that with clouds.
Yeah, and I do it with pretty much everything. And I think part of the problem is this: people want to get a good painting right away, and they're too focused on that. And it's funny, I started a workshop about 4 years ago. It was called an advanced workshop, and I said, what we're going to do is break it all down. And this is one of those things where you go, I'm going to build it, nobody's going to come.
Right.
Because I was telling people, I said, be prepared. The first day we're going to do nothing but rocks because they have hard edges, and most people struggle with shapes. I mean, that's really one of the biggest things people struggle with. So it fills up all the time, and it's on overload right now, but because people don't want to go home. And one of the good things about the learning thing is what they're trying to do, and I think the guy from Seattle Seahawks, he practices this, to teach people perseverance. How do you, once they're motivated and have an interest, how do you teach them to persevere? And that's part of it. If you're not going to sit at home and want to do that yourself, get with a group or go to a workshop where they drag you through that. Because if you're with the group, you will do that. Because I ask people, how many of you are going to go home and spend 3 or 4 hours and paint rocks? Well, nobody's going to do that on their own, except for maybe a few people. So whatever, I think part of it's getting people to do it. And I think the other problem is people don't always understand. Like when I was taking workshops, a lot of times an instructor wouldn't talk a lot. And for me, the key was to get in their head and to figure out exactly what they're doing. Or if it's too obtuse, you go, I can't do it. I don't get it. I don't understand what they're talking about. So for me, I always say this: you won't hear it till you're ready to hear it. And for the reason is this: it always turns out that you could hear it 1,000,000 times, but all of a sudden you're at that certain level where now you can get it.
It clicks.
Yeah. And there's a great portrait painter that was next to my studio in Atlanta, a guy named Mark Shatoff. And I go over there and take it every now and then just so I could understand what, you always want to be back at the beginner's level when you're teaching so that you can understand. So he'd tell me 5 things. Well, the first 2 was all I could get.
Right.
The other 3 went right past me because I was still struggling with the first 2. So I always find that interesting, and I find it very interesting. There's so much great stuff out now on how you learn better and how you get there, and the motivation part and how you help people get to that perseverance level. And I think part of it's curiosity, and at the one Plein Air convention, and who was the head note speaker a year ago? George Carlson.
George Carlson.
He made a great statement. I have to reinvent myself every 10 years. And I thought, that is how you keep it fresh. Because for me, when I first started, I was the happiest person going to workshops because I was terrible and it didn't bother me. So I was just learning. So I didn't have any judgment of what I was doing. And it's kind of funny, Carlson said you have to reinvent yourself, and I keep thinking, what you do. And when you're first starting, it's a novelty. You know, everything's novel. But for people that have been painting a while, they find nuances.
Well, I think that was a fabulous example because George, for instance, was a very successful sculptor. Hugely successful, major sculpture around the world that he had done at very high prices. And he could have been set for life doing that, but he abandoned that and said, okay, I'm going to become a painter now. He started out as a painter, then he became a sculptor, and then he decided to really master painting. And so he wasn't clinging, and I think one of the things that happens is that people cling to whatever it is they have. They cling to a job that they don't really love, or they cling to where they are because growth is scary. For some people anyway. Obviously not you.
Well, yeah, you know, I think it is for everybody, but I think part of it is that's what keeps, you know, for me, you've got to lead your life. In other words, you start creating this artist's life, which is so great because the artists are so great. Most of them are so sharing and so much fun, and they're a pleasure to be around. And there's some really great artists. And so if I went painting with Michael Lynch, who to me is just a fabulous landscape painter, and he's a great guy, and he's just about, you know, just go paint, get it, you know, and then he's also challenge yourself, move yourself. And I saw a little clip on Facebook the other day with David Bowie talking about your best works when you don't really feel like your feet are touching the ground. So I think you get bored sometimes, and I think you have to find those nuances. So I think it's funny, you know, and if you're around people that are doing it, like for me, this is a great thing. I always go, all right, I got to shake it up a little. I'm starting to get bored with what I'm doing. So I go like this. I took a Cindy Barron watercolor workshop, and she's great with her shapes and her values and everything. And I could barely draw. I'm a painter. And it was the most interesting thing to me to see how it all came together. That was really cool. And then so every year I try to take something. The next year I took a Michael Lynch workshop, and he hadn't taught in a long time. And 20 years ago in one of his workshops, he had like Matt Smith, Bill Anton, and Ralph Oberg. So you can imagine this guy, great guy, great painter too. So it's all these people I've got something from, and you get to build on it, which is really nice.
Well, you know, when you talk to the best painters out there, you find that they all do that. They're all continually educating themselves. Most of them are not resting on their laurels. They want to push themselves to the next level. I've talked to many who will say, well, I'll take a workshop from this guy or from this lady because they are really good at one particular thing, clouds or rocks or skies or edges, and so they'll study, and so they're always pushing themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit, and to be able to do that is I think you have to lose all judgment of yourself. You know, when you're a kid, you don't really know you're doing anything wrong until you start getting a little older. So I feel like it's like if you go in, let's say you go into a competition or something, or you do a paint out or something, if you go in there with two ideas in mind, contribution and growth, and you don't think about sales or anything else or about, am I going to win an award, everything always works out for the best.
Right, but it's hard to put that out of your head, isn't it? Isn't that kind of in the back of your head, wow, somebody's going to really love this and buy it?
You know, that's a good question, but I think what happens is this. Now, the first time I tried it was I was going into an event where I was from the East Coast with a bunch of Western painters, and I went, well, this may not turn out so well for me. And so I thought like that, but then when I said, well, the best thing I can do is learn to paint like, you know, to really grow here and to contribute, and it worked out really good. It turned out that everything worked out fine for me, and I thought, you know, that's the way to go in. So now in my mind, I go, anytime I start to get judgmental of myself or think, what's everybody going to think, I go, just same thing, contribution and growth, and then I know it's probably going to work out. And it doesn't, you know, they never always do. You know, and Michael Lynch even said the same thing. He goes, you know, I was painting around all these great painters. He goes, as soon as I said, I don't really care what everybody else thinks about how I paint. He goes, that's when everything fell in place.
Yeah, you know, that's pretty intimidating, isn't it?
Yeah.
You set up next to somebody who's well known and you kind of want to impress them with what you know.
You gotta lose all that.
You find out very quickly you don't know anything.
The sooner you lose that, you know, it's always interesting to me, if you keep it simple, like for me, as a trial lawyer, we used to break everything down to a 6th grade level. I've been in workshops where I thought, what are they talking about? This sounds like nuclear physics. It needs to be so simplified so that when you're out there plein air painting or painting from life, all of a sudden you go, okay, I know, you know, and you can talk to yourself a little bit and know what to do.
So how do you break painting down to a 6th grade level?
I think, you know, it gets kind of fun if you, one of the big problems that I learned was I thought, how am I going to fast track it? So I was able to piece together some of it. So let's say if I go all the way back, I have Damon Carter, who was really helpful because he was focusing me on shapes. Now, for me, I think what happens is people are either, especially when I watch workshops, it's kind of interesting to see. People are either good with their color, or they're good with their value, or they're good with their shapes. But I've never seen anybody naturally good with all 3 of them.
You mean attendees?
Yeah, and I mean, I think if you've reached a certain level and you've been painting for 20, 25 years and you know what you're doing, they can fly by, okay? But the problem is when you're in the learning process, you have to break it down. So I was going, let's see, so from Ned Mueller once told me, I did a one-day, somehow I ended up in a one-day, and he goes, if you did value studies for 2 years, you'd jump way ahead of everybody. Well, being as I don't like to draw and color was the only thing I was even halfway good at, I thought, well, that's not going to work very good. So I remember seeing these warm tonals. So I thought, well, if I could just figure out those, then I could put the color on them, which was the part I liked. So by doing the warm tonals, I got to use paint immediately. I didn't have to use a pencil and do black and white. So I think people have to find what works for them. Because I don't like to draw, I don't like to do little sketches, but I love the way paint moves. So if I did a warm tonal first, I got all my values and my shapes right, then I could pre-mix my colors. And I picked that part up from Christensen. And so there was a pre-mixing there. And then I picked part of the values up of the landscapes from Matt Smith. And so I was able to go, let's do the tonal first, then mix the color, then put it on, and then learn the paint application, and the edges are the last.
Well, I think breaking it down really makes a lot of sense because you really, you know, there's just so much information you have to think about. You know, it's like, really painting is like sitting down in the cockpit of a 747 and having all these gauges, right? You got to think about edges, you got to think about color, you got to think about value, you got to think about atmospheric perspective, and so on. And so if you can just do one at a time like you did, master it, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and this is, people go, oh, well, I don't really, I go, well, think about it this way. If I set up my tonal, and I was terrible at shapes. My trees looked like the pillars of the Supreme Court building when I first started. There was no variety, no interest, no nothing. So I would go like this. I would go, it took me a while to get even some shapes. And I read one time that Leonardo da Vinci said, hey, he had his students, they were taking the stains off the walls and just practicing shapes because it increases your repertoire of shapes. Well, like a Cindy Baring, she could nail them. So, but certain people, like me, struggle with them. And from watching workshop people, that's their #1 issue. So doing the tonal up front without the color involved isolates it for you. And for me, even when I go in when I don't do them really anymore, but when I was in a competition, I would do my tonal.
You don't do competitions anymore?
I'll do, I think I'm doing Laguna Beach this year. But I don't really do them anymore.
Because?
I think it's just at some point you get kind of, and I never did a lot of them. Although I don't think, there's a good camaraderie among a lot of those people, and I really like meeting some of the young guns is what I call them, because they're a lot of fun. And, but I think, and I think people give competition the wrong word. I think the purpose of competition is to make you a better painter.
Elevate you.
Yeah, it's not to beat somebody else. But I think kind of where I am, I like to teach. It's one of my passions. I spend time trying to figure out what makes a great painting, and then I read all the time the new science that has come out on how do people learn better, what keeps them motivated. All these new books out, essentialism, creativity, grit, all these things are amazing at talking about how you do deliberate practice and how you get somebody to give you feedback. So that to me is a huge interest in, and I really enjoy it.
Well, you're always learning.
Yeah.
Now, are you reading art books?
I don't know that I've read any. Oh, there is one. If I feel like I'm getting bored or I'm let down, I just pick up Robert Andre's The Art Spirit. If that won't lift you up, it's going to be a long day. That book is amazing because he's talking about the passion. And I always say this to people, and I don't think people know all the time. If you can answer two questions, what do you love to paint and how would you love for your painting to look? If you can put those down, you can probably do a pretty good painting.
And what do you think makes a great painting?
You know, that's the toughest question in the world. I think that's one of those things where you go, you know it when you see it. How do you describe it? But I do think part of it's this, I think it's an emotional connection. I think when the sum of all the parts really fit together and is greater than the sum of the parts. And see, all this to me is like speaking in legalese. It's esoterical. I don't really, it's hard to answer that. I mean, if people can go like this, if you're real logical and go, well, if the values are all working dead on and you got great edge work, there's a beautiful color harmony, and and that's where people go. And of course, that's great, but that doesn't always, it has to have a ton of interest. And I think that's one of the things that, it's really interesting. You'll be working on a painting, you go, just nothing working. And then, but it may be lacking interest, but for me, one of the big things that people miss, and it's real interesting when a competition comes to your hometown city, you have a bunch of people that are taking workshops from you, and they go in and they go, now we see exactly what you're telling us is dead on. Or they go to the plein air convention and they go, wow, that's dead on. Shade and light to me is critical. Like, I love the feeling of light in a painting. So if I can feel the warmth of the light and the cool, and then everything else is together. I was in a competition one time, and I was sitting out there and I was painting in the Tetons, and I went, I'm going to get the lighting on that Mount Moran just right. And I'm going to stand here for the next 15 minutes till I get the light and shade to read. And sometimes it's a quarter of value up, quarter value down. A little temperature shift, a little warmer in the light, a little cooler here. And finally I got it, and I said, that looks it feels right. Everything's right there. That was my first painting that sold out of that show. So I think, for some people that's very important. Other people tend to be more focused on just shapes. I don't know. So I don't pretend to know it all. I mean, it's so hard to figure out. Sometimes I can't figure out what's going on.
So where is this all going for you? What are you going to do next?
I've been thinking about that. I'm at the 10 to 12 year period.
Yeah.
It's time to reinvent.
You're going to start knitting?
I think it's, it's so interesting because I think, this is funny, it's all perseverance. So I've gone from novelty, now it's the fun part. It's nuance. How can I make this landscape work better? What could make these, just take a section of clouds. What makes them better? What makes a set of rocks? You get into that, and then I thought, I'm going to try something else too, because I believe in this tiny step working. It's the same thing for me. When I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is work out. I set up a ritual. I know that's what I've got to do. Okay, then I go through my reading, I do everything. So I don't start painting till probably 1 in the afternoon unless I'm on a trip. And then I'll only paint for 4 hours because it's so intense. And it's specifically inclined to do that. So, it's a ritual.
Right. I think rituals are very important for people. You got to have a routine that you go through in the morning to kind of to set the tone of your day, to get certain things done. Obviously, working out is terrific for you.
Well, you want your energy, I think, don't you?
Absolutely. But I find it interesting that you work out and then you read. You're feeding your mind.
Yeah. Well, so all these new, I like science-based things so that I'm not like floating out here. So when somebody says, if you do this, if you have deliberate practice, and that best line was, how do you coach somebody perseverance? Because if they keep doing it, they'll become good at it at some point.
So what is it that you learned as a trial lawyer that applies to painting?
There's more logic in painting than people realize. When setting up the shapes, setting up the values, and setting up the design is, for me, the hardest part of the painting. It's also the most logical part of the painting. And for me, I have to get through that first 15 to 20 minutes. If it's a simple design, if it's more complex, it takes longer than that. So there's more logic involved. And it also, if you keep it simplified in your mind, you're way better off. For example, if people talk about, if you read Carlson and you talk about all the general rules, like what's the darkest part of the landscape? So he'll go through the whole process. Well, if you go like this and go, the light source is the sky, and the trees, the silhouette, it's standing straight up, so it's next darkest. Then you tilt, and all of a sudden you're picking up rocks and mountains, and then all the way down to the ground plane. Stay simple in your mind, so when you're out there, you can focus on it like that. Just in case you get it. Everything has exceptions and different things when you're out there, but having the general guidelines in your head is really helpful. Part of it's just that if you want to do it, stay with it. One of the other things that you learn about it, this is, what I like about art is I'm creating that old painting. It's my creation. If I mess it up, it's my fault. And this is a good thing that I think that's critical. In the book Grit, they now saying that you could actually increase your IQ and increase your abilities in areas, which means you can grow your brain. So one of the things is this: if you get up, everything else, if it's intrinsically motivated and you say, this is how I'm motivating myself, then it's not subject to those external factors like awards and things like that. And primarily intrinsically, outside things are important, yeah, but it doesn't need to be the primary focus of why you're painting. But the most interesting thing about it was that if you can increase your brain like that, and you can increase your abilities like that, and you just stay with it, you're in control of that. And so you control your own attitude and beliefs also. So like people go, well, I get up and I just don't feel good. Well, that's your choice. Now, it's easier said than done, but the more you work on that morning ritual, the easier it is to create your choice.
Well, it's like going to the gym. Most people don't feel like going to the gym in the morning. I drag myself to the gym because I know if I don't, I'll regret it, but then my mood changes. I feel better.
Yeah, and that choice, sometimes you're going to get beat up, but at least you've made that, the ritual, and they say rituals are really hard to change. So that guy, there's a book out called Happier, the guy, it's the #1 attended class at Harvard University, and the guy goes, you may change one ritual at a time, maybe two. Any more is going to be a failure. So, And
a lot of that starts with gratitude.
Yeah.
Right? Appreciating what you have, because that really impacts your mood. You think about what you're going through in your life compared to what somebody else is going through, and suddenly what's bad seems good.
That's a huge point. I'm glad you brought that up. It's really interesting to me because I had a theologian for an aunt, and she was a Catholic nun. And I don't think I've ever met a more grateful person in my life, but she was a lot of fun. As soon as she didn't have to wear the habit, she liked to drink wine, but she had met Bon Bron, she knew the Dalai Lama, all these type things. But that was the #1 thing, and she said, that's it. And so then all of a sudden you read all the books and they now say that's the #1 key to happiness. And that if you could get up every morning and write 3 things you're grateful for, and do it for 20-something days in a row or 20 days in a row, it'll change your whole outlook on life. So that's one of the things, and the other's thanking people. You know, I like to get up in the morning and send out a couple of emails to people and go, hey, I really appreciate what you did, and thanks for helping me with that or whatever. And that helps too.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because I just heard, I was listening to a podcast or a tape or something, and the guy said, you know, open up your morning with gratitude and then think about 3 people that you're grateful for, maybe from the day before, somebody's done something for you. And then send them an email right away or get on the phone and call them. And so I decided to start trying that. And it's amazing how it makes me feel, but it's also amazing how it's making them feel, because people are not recognized as much as they should be.
Yeah, and it's amazing how when you sit down and you think about that, how all of a sudden it could have been just some little thing yesterday, and how all of a sudden you send that email to them and they're just so excited about it, and you get something nice back.
And they're passing it on to others, right?
Yeah.
Because when they're feeling good, it's the same with confidence. When you're confident, you know, then you lift other people up, and then those people will get confident, lift others up, and so on.
That's I never even thought about the confidence part.
Well, there you go.
You know, that's a big help. And because I always say this, you need to be around supportive. I was lucky. I ran into people that were supportive and that were helpful. And look, a bad person can drag you down.
Very rapidly.
And it can really, and life's too short for that. I know everybody says that, but we go on I usually take a workshop to Italy or France or something once a year. And the number one thing I know is once you get far away like that, it's very easy for people to start to slide. They're far away, they want to think they're painting, they can paint better, you know, and that type of thing. And so there's a pep talk up front, you know. One of them is no whining. 2, if you start, you know, spiral up, because if you start going down, you need to catch it fast.
So how do you spiral up?
Well, I think you recognize first, awareness is the number one key. You go, all right, look, I'm starting to go down, my thoughts are negative. If I can't change my thought myself by substituting another thought, I go tell somebody real quick, hey, I'm having a problem right here, I need to think about, you know, help me out a little bit.
So in other words, your self-talk, if you start saying, hey, this painting is awful, I'm not doing a good job with it, then you got to pull yourself out of that mindset.
Yeah, and if you can't do it, you need to go get help. People are too afraid to ask for help. Like, there's a great guy, this guy's a really good painter in the Northeast, Jonathan McPhillips, and he goes like this. He goes, you know, I got tired of looking at my paintings, critiquing them all the time. He goes, finally I just started saying, I'm going to start talking about what's good in them first, and then I'm going to start talking about, and I thought, you know, that is a great idea.
That is a great idea.
Because we're all so critical of what we're doing that nobody's going, hey, you did a great job, you know?
Yeah, and you know, when you think back to when we were children and we were playing with crayons, I don't think we were critical about any of that. We were just there to enjoy the process.
Yeah, and so how's the question where you go, the tough one is this, painting's hard. You're in there, you're in your studio, you got 4 hours to go on this big one. It's not working.
Yeah, it's hard, but at the same time, you know, you could be working on a road crew somewhere. That's hard.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And so I always go, enjoy the process.
Right.
And then I love that, what's the one about the 3 people that were the brick masons on the big chapel, and one of them goes, hey, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I got to put this brick and mortar together. You know, this is a tough job. He goes, I got to show up every day. The next guy goes, you know, it's not a bad job. I'm getting pretty good at it, and I can earn a living for my family. The third guy goes, oh my God, this is the greatest job in the world. I get to build a chapel. This is beauty. I'm learning, and I'm putting out beauty every day. So what's the difference? Attitude.
Right.
That's all it is.
Right.
So how do you change it? By getting some help sometimes. Right. You know, I used to think, what's that great line? If you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, go with others. Because, you know, when you grow up and you're taught, well, you got to get out there and earn a living and take care, you know, whatever, you think, I got to go do this on my own. You don't realize how much help you've had along the way.
Absolutely critical.
So it's so nice to, you know, that's what I think is nice about the artist community. First of all, they seem to be really fun people. They're easy. And there's some egoism, but boy, you better check that at the door if you really want to hang out.
Yeah. So, final thoughts for anybody who might be learning to paint, watching this and struggling a little bit. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the number one thing to do is to be ready to lose any judgment of what you're going to paint and how it's going to turn out.
Don't get too invested in what you're painting.
Absolutely not, and don't judge your paintings. I mean, go through like you're in college and you're in the learning period, and if you keep that attitude the whole time, it's a really great thing. Number two, and this especially applies to men, get out of your studios, get to some workshops, and get around some people that can paint and help you grow. And look, you can tell, if the teachers, and there's a lot of good ones out there, are trying to help you and you sense that, then you stay with them. Those are great teachers, and you may have to move around and get a few other things from some other people. Don't get caught up where it's egotistical or it's about that person, the teacher. The teacher's supposed to bring out in you. Everybody finds their own authentic voice at some point. You're going to paint a little bit like your teachers at first, but as long as you're not copying, and your style's going to come to you. Look, this is a great thing that I learned. You can sit there and go, I'm going to sit here in my room till I figure out my style. That is not going to work.
Right.
Okay? Same thing on creativity. If you go, I don't know what to paint today, pick up an art book, get outside, start painting. It'll all of a sudden come to you. Be real reflective, keep up your journals, but make sure you're getting help and you're around the positive people. That makes all the difference in the world.
Keep up journals. Tell me about that.
Well, like for instance, I'll always write, what do I really love to paint? What would I really love, like I like the fall. I love the yellow trees. I like to be in that atmosphere. So I'll keep writing, and if you're not aware and you're not being reflective at some point of what you really like and picking up those finer threads, you've got too many choices. And you know what? That's a hard thing, because all of a sudden you're sitting there going, oh my God, I like everything, okay? We all, that's a very easy situation to fall into. But some things, and it was in one of the good books, it was in the Happier book, I think, the guy would do 3 circles. What do I really like? What I really, really like? And what do I really, really, really like? And you've got to get into that 3rd circle to stay motivated and to really keep going. So, because at first I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went, what was my passion? So it's funny, when I left somewhere, I was teaching a workshop or something, I sat down on an airplane next to an artist coach. And she goes, I hate that. She goes, I love the word passion, but people won't commit. They come in, I go, if you don't want to commit. But I think it's an evolving process. So for me, before I knew what I wanted to do or where I want to move, I would take the questions in what color is your parachute, where people were changing careers, and figure out what did I really want to do. And then I'd just watch it and let it evolve and evolve. So this is what happens. And then you develop that perseverance and you get a coach to stay with you. So somehow you get people to help you. So I was sitting there the other day and I went, God, I never thought I'd do this, but I'm going to go take singing lessons. and I can't sing. In 2nd grade, I was told just to mouth the words and not sing in the choir. Ever since that time, I thought it's just over for me.
Yeah, they shut you down.
The first thing that people always go like this, don't quit your day job. Well, right. Undeterred, don't be deterred by anything. Keep going. Because the first thing that singing coach says, it's not for you to judge how you're singing. It's for me to help you get better. So anytime we're our own worst judges of our artwork. Don't judge your artwork. I always I go like this. I go, this is the painting I love. This is my very best painting. I'll put them up in front of a workshop class and everybody likes the other one. Don't judge your own work. And get people to help you with it. One of the funniest things that ever happened to me was this guy, Damon Carter. I was working on a painting. He goes, that's a good mountain painting. I said, I kind of like it. He goes, that's pretty good. So he goes like this. He goes, let's clay it, and then we'll each have it before you get rid of it. I said, that's perfect. So we should clay it. Now we've been looking at this mountain painting for about 2 weeks. This guy is an incredible eye for shapes. We put it up there, there's a big square right in the center of the mountain, after it's been gicled and everything. So what? I changed the edge of a shape, and that fixes it. Submitted into a big national contest, and I'm in bed one morning, I get an email from an artist, goes, "Oh, why aren't you here? You just won the Best Landscape Award from Everett Raymond Kinsler." If I hadn't asked, or he hadn't seen that shape issue, it would have never even got in the contest. So get help from your friends. It's big.
Yeah, masterminds, or, you know, coaching from friends, mastermind groups, you know, getting together with people and helping each other with your problems. You know, if you're in a local community and you've got a bunch of good painters around you, get them to give you constant input and feedback. You're not going to get that feedback from your mother. They're gonna tell you they love it.
And you want it honest.
Yeah.
Much rather you find out right then before you hang it in a gallery wall or it's in a big show.
Yeah. My daughter will walk into my studio and she'll say, "Dad, the head's too big. That tree's wrong." You know, no training, but she can see what I can't see.
Good eyes, yeah. And see, it's always interesting to me when you're teaching a workshop and you go in an area and they go, "Oh, can you come back?" or something like that. And you go, "Why don't y'all form a group and critique?" You know, you can get back around at some point in time, but they can self-critique. If you can teach people to self-critique themselves, they form groups. There's a great one down in Macon, Georgia, that they do a super job. And there's one in Atlanta now. So they're all, you know, that's an encouraging thing to get people to do.
You know, that's what the plein air convention is all about. It's about bringing community together. People, somebody told me they met several other people from their own town that they didn't know existed. They had this common interest. Now they're going painting together. I think this whole sense of community is really important for artists, especially from a growth standpoint.
Yeah, I think, and that really is fun. We were at the convention, and I know we were sitting out there, and there was, I looked around at our table, there was 35 people, 35 artists, just sitting there talking about art. And I don't know, some of them I'd never met before, and it became really intriguing. I don't know, it's a great group of people, and you know, most of them are so much fun, and most of them are so giving. Like if you can usually, I've noticed this, when we're going around helping people, doing those, when the paint outs.
Field painters.
Yeah, you get all these emails back from these people that go, "Hey, I really appreciate you stopping by and helping me do that."
Oh, that's great.
So it is. It's I think it's a great thing. So I don't, you know, for me, there's something I'll confess. 5 hours in the studio can wear me out. So I have to figure out ways to actually make it exciting for me.
Right.
And so I take a lot of breaks, and I've learned that it's the nuances that I've got to pursue. And if you think about it like this isn't for just one painting. If I can learn to shift the nuance here, it applies to every
other painting from that point forward.
So it has a big effect, and I think if you think about things like that, and see, I'm not a big buyer into the 10,000 hour thing. For me, 10,000 bad hours is not getting you anywhere. And that's the Seahawks thing now. That coach is going, you know, you have your interest up, but they practice deliberately. Right. I'm going to work on this. So if you go in and it's something you go, I want to really work on light and shade. Bingo. Stay with that for the whole day.
Right.
So make it fun or you'll quit. Going back to the workout routine, the best workout advice I got was from this guy 20 years ago. He goes, "I knew that if it was too hard," this is a very good point. If I knew that if it was too hard, I would never keep it up. So he goes, "I ran 10 minutes out and I knew I had to run 10 minutes back." I've been doing that for 10 years now. He goes, "It works." So one thing I've learned, if you're stressing yourself too much, it's just stress. You can't cover that much ground and learn that much that fast. If you're not pushing yourself enough, you're in boredom. So there's a happy medium in there. So that guy actually got me to stay on my workout routine, and so I may increase it. I mean, I do a lot more now because I've gotten older and I need to, but I did this one time. I said, you know, I'm going to really work on my stomach and get that in. I started doing all those things. I did them for 3 days in a row and I quit. And I said, see, that's not the way it goes.
Right.
You can't kill yourself.
Right.
So if you're painting, recognize that it's those little steps that are going to get you there, and don't try to, I mean, if you don't turn that big ship right away.
Well, thank you for this. A lot of really great insights today.
Well, I appreciate it. It's great to be here, and I mean, it was very easy. You made it easy.
Well, that's what I do. Bill Davidson says he's a recovering attorney. He's a lot of fun to be around. I hope you enjoyed Landscape Painting Secrets. You can learn more about it at lilyartvideo.com. I'm Eric Rhodes.
Landscape painting has the power to inspire our deepest connection with nature, to soothe the mind, and to carry the viewer away to a place that is both sublime and timeless. As a landscape painter, you have the power to help someone feel the heat of the sun reflecting off of billowing clouds and the cool and crisp air of an autumn morning in the Rocky Mountains. Even something so simple as the swaying of reeds alongside a shoreline can hypnotize your viewer. In the all-new Landscape Painting Secrets, Bill Davidson shares a step-by-step and in-depth demonstration that reveals how to capture the raw and essential beauty of nature through oil painting.
Horizon a little warmer, a little cooler in here, a little warmer up here. So it would transition all the way down, and you just keep doing this. Cool, warm, cool, warm, cool, warm. Darker, farther away from the sun, darker a little higher up, more muted as you go farther back. You could paint this whole sky even without any clouds in it. But learning the clouds, once you get clouds down, it gets really nice to be able to go out and go, I know I'm not afraid to go out there, and this thing will start to work.
You'll discover how to train your eye to perceive the best shapes and values for your painting, how to use focal points to create strong areas of interest and guide the viewer's eye.
I may spot a really good tree and move it over and use it somewhere else. So that's why taking photos also, it's limiting. Okay, it's very limiting. And also when you're dealing with these value finders, you're great to see the values and put them in order, but be careful, because you're going to have to make the values fit to make the big shapes work. So you got to be careful with all the tools. Other than that, you'll end up just copying, and that's not going to work out for you the best way you want.
Bill will teach you the secrets to painting foregrounds and backgrounds, how to capture the subtle nuances of reflections on water, and the most effective techniques for working with midtones and temperature shifts. You'll also discover how to make little adjustments that can transform a good painting into an amazing one.
This transition here is a little bit too strong. So all I have to do is get between whatever that value is. There's a transitional value that'll soften this edge and roll this cloud a little bit more.
If you've always wanted to learn how to paint vivid landscape scenes the way the masters do it, then this training video collection was made for you. Landscape Painting Secrets with Bill Davidson is now available on DVD and streaming video.